Pursuant to Standing Order 108, we're going to continue our study of the state of Canada's francophonie. And we're televised this morning, but we're not on Tout le monde en parle. It is the Standing Committee for Official Languages, but we're happy to have with us this morning Ronald Kaza to discuss the situation in Ontario. Welcome, Mr. Kaza. And we'll give you a few minutes to do your presentation, and then, as usual, we will have questions from around the table from the committee members. Mr. Kaza, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Paradis. I'll do a short presentation, and there are 3 points I'd like to discuss. And I'd like to discuss these points every time I have a chance to, when I discuss the reality of the minority Francophone community, not only in Ontario, but elsewhere. First, I'd like to tell you what it's like to live as a member of a minority community. There are many people who know what this is like, but there are other people who may not know this as well. And then I'll talk about backup, the backup we need, and we can't miss this opportunity. And I'm also going to talk about the vulnerability of rights holders. So, living as a member of a linguistic minority, it takes continuous efforts. And for people who have experienced this, you'll know what I'm talking about. But for those who haven't, I'll give you an analogy. Being a Francophone minority, or an Acadian, or Franco-Manitobian, or Franco-Ontario, it's like you continuously have to swim and keep on making efforts. You have to make efforts every day. And when I say swim, I mean you have to continually keep moving and keep on making efforts. You have to make sure your language and your culture are always part of our instinct when we face a situation. And when you swim, I'm talking about the Anglophone minority, and they're in the boat. They don't have to make efforts. They're in the boat, and they float along without making any particular efforts to respect their culture or language. And assimilation, that's when we stop swimming, when a Francophone stops swimming. He won't drown, but he gets on the boat with the English speakers. And what happens on this boat is that once he's on the boat, he stops swimming. And soon he forgets how to swim. And if you forget how to swim, you won't be able to show your children how to swim either. And their children won't know how to swim. And then there's irreparable damage that is done, and we end up with assimilation of the linguistic minority. And those who should be swimming learn to live on a boat. And the objectives of all Franco-Ontarians and Franco-Manitobans is to never stop swimming. And one of the ways to make sure we never stop swimming is to be surrounded by other people who are swimming with us. Franco-Ontarians are swimming, and they need to have a lot of people swimming with them. They have to be encouraged to keep swimming. And swimmers need to be encouraged. They need to see beacons to see where they're swimming to. And the Montfort Hospital was a beacon for them. And when you see the Montfort Hospital in the distance, it encourages all swimmers, not just the swimmers who may need services at the Montfort Hospital, but everyone who realizes that this institution exists. It sends them a message. And this is the most important message we have to send to all members of the linguistic minority. And it tells them that they have to continue swimming to have their language respected. And this, we have to send this message as often as possible, every chance we get. So keep swimming, keep making efforts. And when we protect our institutions and when we make them stronger, we're sending a message to the linguistic minority that they should keep making efforts. And the message that we can't send them is that constitutionally a government cannot send its linguistic minority, is the message that it's not worth swimming or keep on making efforts, because once we stop swimming, that's when we have irreparable damage and we lose a sizable portion of our language and culture. So I said we need backup, and the good news is that we get backup every day. They arrive every day at the airport in Ottawa and in Toronto and other airports, because these aircraft brings francophones from all around the world, from Africa, from Haiti, from other countries where there are francophones. And these people come here to save us. They save our linguistic minority. And these are the best soldiers around to help us wage this war against assimilation. And these people, when they come by plane, they should be welcomed by members of the linguistic minority. They should be welcomed as heroes, because these are parents who are coming often with children, and what they want is to have a better life for their children. And they've decided they can have this better life here in Canada, and they want to have it here in French. So we should welcome them with open arms. And I'm talking about our communities here. We should welcome them in our communities, in our circles of friends and families, because they will help us in our fight against assimilation. And I'll tell you what's extraordinary, because I've worked with many people who come from other countries, and when they get off the plane, they run off and they jump in the water as soon as they arrive here. We don't have to convince them to get in the water. They jump right in with us. So we find them everywhere. And these soldiers, these people, we have to do what we also can to encourage them so that they can be established in all corners of the country, where people need support to swim with them. However, there are some members of our own family who are reluctant to swim, and I'll give you a couple examples. Rights holders, and I use the word rights holders for Francophone parents who register their children in English schools. This has been the case for decades. It's often due to the false illusion that their children will better learn English and that they will become perfectly bilingual. And this is a false illusion. This is false, because the reality is that when a Francophone goes to an English school, that's the start of assimilation. They start losing their language and culture, and this person becomes an Anglophone. They stop swimming, and they live on the boat. Rights holders, even their children, when they go to English schools, well, this is just putting them on the boat, and they stop swimming, and they're unable to preserve their language and culture. The second example I have are rights holders and Francophone parents who send their children to immersion schools. Immersion schools is one of the best things that have happened for the linguistic minority, because what immersion schools have done, they have raised awareness of linguistic minorities. And what we've seen over the past 2 decades is that there's a whole population that is more aware of the importance of linguistic minorities in all provinces. They realize how important it is to have the language and the culture in French. And this is largely thanks to immersion schools. And when we make people aware of these situations, we're also making the parents aware. And this has been positive. But immersion schools are schools for Anglophones, not for Francophones. Immersion is a tool that allows Anglophones to integrate as much as possible Francophone reality in Canada. Immersion schools are not a place where we should be placing Francophone students. Those who attend immersion schools live on the boat. And when we put our child in an immersion school, we're putting them on the Anglophone boat. People may not realize this, but there are young people who graduate from Francophone schools in Ontario, for example, in New Brunswick. These young people may do studies, postdoctoral or master's studies in Cambridge or Harvard, and they only study in English, and they graduate at the top of their class. They study in major universities throughout the world, and these are French students who learned English. When we graduate from a French school, we're just as good in English as Anglophones. So we have to remember this, and we have to make sure we get this message out to encourage parents. Francophone parents and rights holders are vulnerable, and they have to do everything possible to make sure when they put their children in school, they shouldn't put them on the boat. They have to teach them to swim as their ancestors have done for generations. And what's even more extraordinary is that when we learn to swim, this child will be able to become aware of his language and culture and live an extraordinary experience. Someone reminded me earlier today that the wolf is at our door in Ontario, in New Brunswick, and may also be at the door in many other provinces. We cannot give up ground. Our institutions are essential. The Université de l'Ontario Français, and also the role of the French Language Services Commissioners, we must give them their rightful role. And I'll talk to you about the Montfort decision. I'll read you an extract from it. People have to realize that the reason that the Montfort Hospital was saved, well, I'll cite you a part of paragraph 91 from the decision. In addition of providing medical training, the institutional and broader role of the Montfort Hospital, or of the UOF, or of the French Language Service Commissioner, of all our institutions, is to maintain the French language, is to transmit Francophone culture, and is to encourage solidarity within the linguistic minority in the province. That's what an institution does. So when we look what our institutions are in our provinces, we have to make sure we do everything we can to protect them so that we can achieve our main objective, is to send a message as much as we can that, yes, it is worth continue making efforts to preserve our language and culture. So I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity to speak before you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much. We're going to start right away with questions from around the table, and with a question from Mr. Bling. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to our committee, Mr. Kaza. Thank you very much for your lesson that you've given us this morning and for your testimony. Could you reread the paragraph you just read out? It was very dense, and I'd like to hear it again, please. In addition to providing a practical role of providing medical training, the institutional role and broader role of the Montfort Hospital and of all other institutions includes maintaining the French language, transmitting Francophone culture, and encouraging solidarity within the linguistic minority. Maintaining the French language, transmitting Francophone culture, and the third, encouraging solidarity within the community. If I've understood correctly, these components are for the French Language Services Commissioner and for the UOF? Yes, they are. This is the case for all institutions, and I'm talking across the country, in Chelmsford, Hearst, Moncton, everywhere where there are institutions. And it could be a hospital, it could be anything. And why do we create this institution? It's because of the important role. And the appeals court has said this for Montfort. So thank you very much for reminding us of the efforts that, well, Francophones have to make in minority settings. Every day they have to continue to swim. And sometimes they even have to swim against the current, I would say. And sometimes we forget in Quebec, in our comfortable situation, that there are linguistic minorities and their institutions are important. And we're doing a special study on the situation in Ontario. And my question is, well, we consider that it's the role of the government, federal and provincial governments, to help institutions. And we've experienced a crisis in recent weeks. And you said, well, you mentioned the Montfort Hospital. Could there be any positive impacts for the community? Sometimes people need a shock. Sometimes we need Denise Bombardier, Tout le monde en parle, to say something shocking, and it wakes people up. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. You mentioned the responsibility aspect this morning, and we all agree the government has a role to play, and we want to show solidarity in this situation. But, well, you lived through the Montfort case, and I'm proud of what my parents and the responsibility they assumed. But can you see how this can mobilize people? And it's really phenomenal what we've seen in terms of mobilization in Ontario and elsewhere as well, in Quebec and across the country. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Mr. Blaney, I have to say you're absolutely right. Perhaps Montfort is the best example of this. Montfort is a small hospital. It's a university hospital. And when, at the time, the Conservative government and Mike Harris, the premier, decided that unilaterally this hospital would be shut down, there was mobilization and an entire process in place. And now, in 2018, we have one of the best university hospitals in the country that has doubled in size in this hospital, Montfort. There are many specialists that didn't used to be there. There is acute care, and now it's a research center. None of this would have ever happened, I believe, if the Harris government hadn't attacked Montfort, because things would have just plodded along the same way. At the end of the day, when there is an attack on us, and when you look at the history of our culture, it's actually strengthened us over time. The challenge is that the community was not expecting an attack. Now, the Montfort ruling is so clear that it is obvious that the government has some obligations not to send out, not to convey the message that they've conveyed. The reality is the community fought, but never fought unless it had to. There really haven't been any major battles waged since Montfort. It's really the first time. And I think what's important is to get back to the table, to make this effort so that we don't end up with a bit of a snowball effect in other provinces. We are a minority. We need to be protected by that very fact. And the ultimate protector of minorities, the ultimate protectors have been the court, and specifically the Supreme Court of Canada, whose mandate it is to protect minorities. And over this time period, this period of time over which we've had to defend our rights, it is possible that there could be an attack on our gains. We would be ideally not having to go through a court process in order to have our rights upheld. Mr. Arsenault. Thank you, Mr. Kaza. Thank you for appearing before us and answering our questions. I have another question. Bill 57, which was passed in Ontario at third reading, or went through third reading. What do you think this means for the future of French education in Ontario? The government said that it wasn't going to subsidize or pay for this, despite all the work that has happened so far. The university already exists. This Université de l'Ontario Français already exists. In actual fact, for all practical purposes, the decision made by the government actually is the death knell of this university. When you were mentioning irreparable damage, this university had done everything it needed to in order to open its doors in 2020. There's a roadmap in order for that. There was a roadmap in order for that to happen. If the doors don't open in 2020, there are a host of young people today that are in grade 11 throughout Ontario that were expecting to study at this Université de l'Ontario Français. And they're going to end up in bilingual or Anglophone universities because of this. And the message that they're going to get, uncontrovertibly, is that, perhaps it's not worth it to make any efforts to try to speak French or continue living in French. I can tell you, Mr. Kaza, I spent all of my time in my region, and I can say that I went to the University of Moncton, and the repercussions on the Acadians and the diaspora are powerful. For such a powerful province as Ontario not to have a French language university, that's inconceivable to me. You are a constitutional lawyer. You are aware of these major legal fights and challenges that have been undertaken over the years. What do you think is the biggest issue now? Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. First of all, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I am a litigator. I have people that, however, have constitutional experience. I have been able to go before the courts on large constitutional files. But I'd like to get back to Moncton. I was talking to Mr. Glandu yesterday from Moncton. And Moncton, in the early 60s, when the university was set up, a major decision had to be taken. The premier of New Brunswick at the time wanted a bilingual university, and other stakeholders were saying, we need a francophone university. At the time, a bilingual university would have been fine. The francophone community at the time was not as vulnerable as it is today. But in Sudbury, at Laurentian, and at the University of Ottawa here, at the time, these two universities were created as francophone universities. Then they were converted into bilingual universities. Once they became bilingual universities, francophones weren't vulnerable. Churches were powerful. Families were strong. In fact, there was a whole network. There was a social system that allowed for the maintenance of language and culture. And that's not the reality today. The constitutional agreement now, or argument rather, is a bit of a gift given to us by the Supreme Court in the Quebec Secession Act. When you look at the rules of the game, if a province wants to separate, you have to see what the contract is. If you want to put an end to a contract, you have to see what that entails. We looked at the Constitution. Supreme Court said there are things that are not written down here, but that are part of the contract. And these are responsibilities that governments have taken on. They did when we signed the Constitution in 1867. One of these implicit clauses, if you will, is an obligation to preserve and promote linguistic minorities. This is a constitutional obligation that's implicit in the Constitution. The Supreme Court went even further by saying, and these linguistic minorities in each province need institutions in order to make this a fact. And this is interesting because the argument, when you look at the decisions that have been handed down, the amendments to laws, and see what the government's doing today. Okay, on the one hand, there's a contract. You're bound by this. Everything you do has to respect this Constitution. One of the obligations you have is to respect and foster these linguistic minorities. If that's not what you're doing in your acts and your laws, then you're violating the Constitution. This is an essential clause. Timelines are really long in these types of constitutional challenges that end up before the Supreme Court. How long do you think it would take for the Court of Appeal of Ontario to support what you're saying? I can tell you that hopefully based on the recommendations of your committee, there won't be a need to go before the courts and the entire situation will be settled. That's the first step. 10 seconds, sir. The timeline, well, it depends. It depends when the community starts feeling some irreparable damage. Then at that point, it requires a court. How can the federal government help you, Mr. Keza, in order to defend this Université de l'Ontario Français? And it is, of course, an Ontario government responsibility, but how can the federal government help? I have to say the federal government has the key here. The key is a financial key. The only excuse Ford has provided, Premier Ford has put forward, is it's a matter of money. So the federal government could put forward the money to put aside that argument so that the university could come into existence. Thank you very much. François. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Keza, for being here today. Your introduction was really a powerful illustration of the daily struggle for minority language communities in attempting to keep their language, their culture, their identity. And it's really important to view things in this way. You referred to the role of the federal government, the role of our committee. We've been asking this very question for 3 weeks now, at least. What can we do? What is our role? part do we have to play based on the information that we've seen? It seems as though people are passing the ball. Ms. Mulroney is saying, Ms. Joly has never specifically mentioned any funding for the Université de l'Ontario Français. Madame Joly is saying, well, I can't provide any funding if they don't make a request. It's a little bit like a dog that's running after its own tail. And really, it amounts to nothing. If you look at people from the AFO, Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario, these people are saying we need federal government leadership. Well, what exactly does that look like? One example of leadership I can give you, for instance, the example of the Premier of Quebec when he criticized the decision made by Ford to put an end to the commissioner and to the commissioner's office and to the Université de l'Ontario Français. What he said publicly is like, listen, I don't understand how you can do this. How is it justified? What the francophones in Ontario have said or have heard from this is that, the Premier of Quebec is saying it's important to keep making efforts here to defend your rights. It's essential to preserve linguistic minorities in all provinces. We shouldn't be shy about this. We shouldn't be afraid that there is some very small minority of people that have a difficulty accepting this reality, which is that Canada has two languages and cultures. These two languages and cultures have to pervade throughout the entire country. It has to be stated clearly because it's going to mean two things. On the one hand, it will motivate all the members of the majority who will say, oh, yes, right, we need to get further involved. We need to make sure that we act and do what's required. And I'm referring to Ontario to make sure that the government does the right thing. But what this means is that it's going to send out a very, very clear message to linguistic minority groups that they have to continue and redouble their efforts. Commissioner Montéverge appeared before us, and he provided a number of examples of some setbacks in terms of official languages right throughout the country, in New Brunswick, with the situation underway, and other provinces as well, in Saskatchewan and other provinces. He explained that really there have been a few steps that we've taken a few steps back. Last Thursday and Friday, we expected official languages to be really on the agenda. Unfortunately, it wasn't there. I get that people might have discussions on the margins, but it didn't. Official languages did not appear on the main agenda. Do we need a prime minister who is willing to call the premiers together to address this very issue in order to have a bit of a status report of as to what's happening? As a minority, when you're in a minority setting, you can't afford to stop swimming, essentially. You can't just tread water. I'm seeing that now we've been pulled backwards. What kind of leadership is required in order to allow us to recover? The situation in Ontario is serious, but the situation is serious elsewhere as well. I'm thinking that the FCFA also made a request. It might be a good opportunity to send out the message to all Canadians that official languages are important. Maybe it would be an opportunity to call the premiers together to discuss this very issue. It's important. It's just as important as economic questions. In fact, I would tell you it's more important. Why? Because if you have constitutional obligations, you can't just simply put forward a financial argument. There's one point that hasn't been said in a while. We have a premier in Quebec who has said publicly that he realizes he has to defend his linguistic minority, and he doesn't have a problem with that. I can tell you, I have appeared before several courts on constitutional matters before the Supreme Court of Canada. It's not really, it has to be said that Quebec acts because of a fear of a precedent elsewhere being used against them in Quebec. The Anglophone minority in Quebec taking certain measures. Well, this concern, this political concern, is non-existent. The Premier of Quebec, and I think we saw this on Tout le monde en parle, it's obvious, and perhaps people are becoming aware of the fact that we're a part of the same family, and we need the help of Quebecers today. And one way in which they can help is they can take part. They can say, listen, this is important. And if you want to be concerned about us, instead of making sure we don't have too many difficulties with our Anglophone linguistic minority in Quebec, we're going to focus on making sure that you all respect your Francophone minorities in each of your provinces. The opportunity is there. The time is ripe to call together all of these premiers in order to address this question. It has to be done sooner than later to set things off on the right track before any more unfortunate decisions like what just happened in Ontario end up happening in other provinces. Mona Fortier.
Merci, Ronald, d'être là aujourd'hui, de pouvoir nous éclairer sur plusieurs questions.
Thank you for all of your testimony. I don't know if my colleagues are aware of the fact that Mélissa Ouimet over the weekend, a Francophone artist, brought together a number of other Francophone artists that actually are performing a bit of a synchronized swim in a way. They have published a song, Personne ne pourra m'arrêter, No One Can Stop Me Now, which, really, I think, is a good analogy for what you were referring to as, once you're in the water, you just can't stop swimming. I think it's an emotional argument that really touches people, those people in minority settings. I think we're still in a state of shock, but we're already taking some action. Minister Joly met with Premier Ford last week at the meeting between premiers, and we are prepared to work with you to fund this Université de l'Ontario Français, is what we're hearing. Is there some way for the Ford government to respond to the call from the federal government saying, listen, we're prepared to have that dialogue? Thank you, Madame Fortier. Madame Fortier really has been involved in almost all of these battles we've waged for the Francophone community. And I can say that from the very start of this situation, the federal government was there to say, hey, we're prepared to support you. This happened from the very first instant, as of Thursday when that announcement went down. And it's clear from a legal standpoint, and I use this word advisedly, legal. The federal government has to be prepared to do everything, but can't impose that. It requires some action on the part of the Ford government. And I think this is the challenge that I'm putting out to you. There needs to be a political way in which the Ford government can do what's required without losing face. And it has to be done that way. They can't lose face. And I'm speaking, if we go before the courts, I mean, it's objective. It's not about losing face. What we want is, okay, once the decision was taken by the Premier and his government, Ford and Ms. Mulroney, nobody intended to cause irreparable damage to the linguistic minority. But now they know, and they've known for a while, that this is reality. And no one is denying that fact. Why? Because it's clear. It's a direct consequence of this action. Now, they need to realize they have to do the right thing. The commissioner, that issue, there are going to be follow-ups. But as to the Francophone University, that's something that needs to be done very soon because every day counts. The head of this university has set out a game plan. It's important. It's important to be able to get to the table and have these discussions. It's really unfortunate that once again, here we are having to make efforts again to protect our gains, what we already have. We build things, and then we're being forced to take some steps back, even though we don't want to. Is there some way through the modernization of the Official Languages Act, or is there some manner in which we can protect the gains that we have achieved? Is there anything we can do as the federal government in order to set these, how can I put this, have these shields up so that we can avoid having these types of reactions from the provinces? The answer, of course, is yes, but I think I have to be cautious in answering your question. I can tell you about my legal position, which is that that obligation already exists. It already exists under the Official Languages Act and Part 7 of the Act. Part 7 could be improved and could be clarified. That is true.
And
La position
in Ontario, we have the French Language Services Act. And this act imposes the same obligations for the provincial government as it imposes on the federal government under Part 7 of the OLA. So all this to say that in situations such as this, it's always better for things to be as clear as possible so that we avoid legal arguments saying that they're not obliged to do things. If the obligation is not as clear as black and white, legal arguments can crop up. And this is why the OLA is so important. If a government believes that official languages are important, it's not so important. But if it doesn't believe official languages are not a priority, well, that's when we really need to have the OLA protected. Because past governments in Ontario who adopted the French Languages Act are part of the situation today. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move to Mr. Sanson. Mr. Kaza, I'm not sure where to begin. I have 50 questions for you, and my preamble alone will take 4 minutes. So I'm not even sure where to start. The first thing I'd like to say is that we have to spend some time together. I love you already, and I don't know you very well. But your description of what it's like to live in a minority setting really inspired me from start to finish. I have lived through this, I've seen the situation, and I've contributed to the situation. So I'll start with, well, your analogy when you talked about swimming. This is excellent. I've seen all my colleagues really appreciated this analogy, particularly those who live in minority settings. I've always said this, well, for 15 years, that living in a minority setting is staying up later and getting up earlier. We have to do this to survive. And this aligns with your analogy of swimming, which is very interesting. Another point I often mention is that when times are tough economically and there's a lack of leadership from people in power, it really becomes apparent. When there's less water in the lake, animals around the lake look at each other differently. And that's very important as well. I could spend hours on this, but let me start with a few examples. The Saint FX University, which is very well known, it's started in a French location, and then it would move to an English-speaking one. Then, a week ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the French University in Nova Scotia. It was supposed to have been transferred to Yarmouth to an Anglophone community, but they fought incessantly to save the university, to keep it there, and it remains a Francophone university, and an exceptional one at that. The University of Moncton, as my colleague mentioned, could have been a bilingual university. Some people wanted that, but some people swam continuously to keep it French. And this is also very important. A few weeks ago, well, you mentioned your quote, and this also touched me. He said that in Quebec, they're doing everything to protect their institutions, but in minority settings, it's the institutions that protect minorities. And that's very powerful. So I have a few questions. Of course, I could talk about it for quite some time. But first, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And then you can run with them. I have colleagues from Quebec who will appreciate this. Let's talk about people from Quebec City versus the minorities in Ontario. I'd like you to talk a bit about their responsibilities. Provincial responsibilities. When there's a lack of leadership, in my view, people say, well, don't go there because it's provincial jurisdiction. But I have a problem with that when we're talking about the 2 founding peoples, as you mentioned. I have so many questions. Well, Daryl, we have to leave him time to answer your questions. A good example is what the Minister of Immigration has done for Francophones. There are Francophones that receives newcomers and then welcomes them in the community. Well, go ahead. Thank you very much. I mentioned the University of Ottawa and the Laurentian University, and they have done a lot for the Francophone community. There are programs, they train people, and one thing with universities that they make leaders. And look at all the leaders from the Francophone community that have graduated from the University of Moncton. And we have to train our future leaders in French universities. That's very important. So I was talking about Mr. Sanson. I was talking with him before we started, and I knew that we were going to talk about Tout le monde en parle and that we'd have to get our message out to our Quebec peers. And Denise Bombardier said there are almost no Franco-Ontarios and there's just a few here and there. So one point I made was that there are more Franco-Ontarians, Francophones in Ontario, than the entire population of the city of Quebec. So let's put things into perspective. There are many people who were surprised to hear that, but that's the reality. The capital of Quebec, the second largest city of Quebec, there are more Francophones in Ontario than there are in Quebec City. So in terms of provincial jurisdiction, when I go to court, I talk about legal, federal, provincial responsibility, but politically, this is moral responsibility. If a province is causing irreparable damage to a linguistic minority, it is doing so to Canadians, the Canadians in that province. That is a moral responsibility to say, you can't do this. This isn't right. You have to stop it. And let's talk about what you're going to do to rectify this. That's the responsibility, because what's happening in Ontario is happening to Canadians. And if there's assimilation because of disseminations that are made by the provincial government, it's Canadians that are being assimilated, not just Franco-Ontarios. And the worst is yet to come. So it's important in terms of what we're going to do right now. You talked about the Minister of Immigration, and that's exactly what we have to do, because when we have immigrants who come to Canada with their families, they also have to receive a message that, yes, you can live a full life in French. You can be happy and develop and offer the best life you can to your children in French outside of Quebec. You can do it in Quebec, but you can also do it outside of Quebec. Thank you very much, Alupa Clark. Chair, Mr. Kaza, I'll continue along that same vein in terms of political and moral responsibility. Let's go back to the metaphor you mentioned. I think the Official Languages Committee is kind of like a beacon for OLMCs throughout the country. And right now, what we're doing, and the whole reason of this urgent study, is to send a buoy out to those who are swimming. And I would ask you to tell us, word for word if possible, in the report that we're going to publish, what would you like to see in it? What would you like to see in our report concretely in terms of intention or direction that we're going to send to the federal government? And that's where the power is. So what would you like to see in the report, sir? what is essential to see in your report would be, well, first, you're right, Mr. Clark. We have to invite all stakeholders to state their opinion on this question. And we have to really ask them to explain what the reality is. And what you've done is you've sent a message to everyone, literally to all Franco-Ontarians. And what you're doing is important, and we have to continue to make efforts. And that's what your Continue is doing. That's the message you've sent to all linguistic minorities. That's clear. So now, what should be in the report? What would be essential to see in the report, in my opinion, is first, that we have to say that this is urgent, that this is an urgent issue, and that this is irreparable damage that is going to be done, and we're going to lose institutions. Let's call a spade a spade. We've made a lot of efforts to establish this university, and people have made commitments to come teach at the university. Well, for example, in the Montfort file, one of the things that we saw, which was extraordinary, well, there was an agreement with the Harris government to not cut services to the Montfort Hospital until a legal decision had been made. So that's why we were able to keep the doctors and patients and specialists at the Montfort Hospital. And in spite of this, they had to make a lot of efforts to keep the hospital together, but there was some protection in place. So what we need to do right now, we need to say, yes, continue with the university, start your first university, and then we'll look at it. We don't want to end the institution and kill it in the egg. And that's why we have to say that this is urgent. Second, we have to say that there is a legal and moral obligation to do everything in our power to make sure that what's happening right now doesn't occur. And that we have to make sure we have to do everything that this does not happen. I don't want to use a double negative, but we have to do what is necessary to make sure that what shouldn't be done doesn't occur. And this may be the most important part. It has to be positive. This is good news in terms of linguistic minorities. It's good news for everyone across the country, and that is why we have to have this is the main reason why we want to have a bilingual country and linguistic minorities in every province, because it's extraordinary for us. It's an extraordinary message for all countries in the world to see that, yes, we can do this, and we can do this in a positive manner. And we can take what's positive from it and make sure that it's an incredible value add for everyone. We don't want people to say we're doing this because we have to do it, because we have a constitutional obligation. Mike Harris and the Conservative government at the time, they didn't go to the Supreme Court of Canada. They skirted it, and they announced that they accepted the judgment of the appeals court. And by accepting this ruling, they accepted the spirit of the decision, because otherwise they'd just be going back to the courts incessantly. And we have to do this. And we have to realize that it's because it's good for us all to have this reality continue in Canada. Emanuela. Good morning, Mr. Kaza. Thanks for being with us this morning. I really liked your introduction. I appreciated it very much. I loved how you explained what it's like to live in a minority setting. I am a Quebecer and I'm Anglophone. So I'm really interested in what you're saying, because people who do live in these situations have to keep swimming. They have to keep making efforts to protect their language and culture in the province where the majority is different. So I would like to know what type of efforts should be made when you have a government that doesn't necessarily know what it's like for you to live in your language and to have the same opportunities as everyone else. Thank you very much, Ms. Lambropoulos. As I mentioned, I represented two major files at the Supreme Court of Canada on linguistic rights, and they were also very similar, parallel situations, challenges. And when I met with the Attorney General of Quebec, he told me, we like you when you're defending linguistic minorities outside of Quebec, but we don't like you as much when you're representing linguistic minorities within Quebec. So I told him, everything you do to linguistic minorities in English, you're giving license to other Anglophone minorities to do to Francophones in their provinces. The reality is that young people in particular, and they are the most vulnerable, there's a scale. If we want for commitment in minority settings, at one extreme, we have some people, if you threaten to kill them, and they would die for their language and culture. There are people at this extreme. Mr. Sanson, he's at this extreme. And at the other extreme of the scale, there are people that if they walk into a store and they speak in French, and the person says,
Que eux autres vont arrêter.
well, they'll stop making efforts and they'll stop there and they'll hop on the boat. What we're doing is we're taking care of the people who are at this extreme. All the decisions we're making for those people who are vulnerable, who are ready to give up the fight, who aren't ready to make these efforts. And that's why we really have to protect our institutions. We can't eliminate part of the role of the French Language Services Commissioner. These are the most vulnerable people, and these are the ones we need to respect, protect, and we have to go to court for them, because within this group, unfortunately today, many of them are young people. These are young people who may not really understand the situation as much, and that's why we have to continue to make the necessary efforts to protect their language and culture. And what's good is that many of these young people today also studied the Montfort case at school, and they've studied these cases, and they know why we went before the courts and what did the courts say, and they know why it's important to continue making efforts, and that's for them that we're fighting. And sometimes we have to make decisions, and what's toughest is that we're talking about a university that was there to help young people who are the most vulnerable. And we want to make sure that when they're done secondary school, some may go to college, and there are excellent French colleges, and some may also want to go to university in French. Now that all this has happened in Ontario, and we've seen that the Ford government,
by removing funding for the university, by removing the commissioner for official languages, for the official language commissioner. And now that Quebec is actually taking a stand for the Francophone minorities across Canada, what do you think should happen in Quebec with regards to the Anglophone minority? Do you see them changing their perspective, or what do you think Anglophones in Quebec could do to gain back some of that power and to actually have their rights respected?
When you're an Anglophone in Quebec, okay, there's not much of a chance you're going to get assimilated, okay? The chances you're going to move away. You're going to want to live elsewhere. That's the option you have if you want to exercise it. That's what we have to avoid. And that's what we've seen as being the consequence of making it very difficult. There's been finally a migration away, and that has weakened every linguistic minority across the country. So when you're looking at basically what can be done by the Anglophone minority, what I have to tell you is they need to ensure that they continue they continue what they've done so far, which is built institutions that are recognized worldwide. And one of the reaching out that could be done by the Anglophone community is probably to the Francophone minority now, in order to work with them in ensuring that you and maybe teaching how you build, how you ensure to be successful in having, for example, a university that becomes a world leader, even though you're a linguistic minority in that province.
Thank you
Et
very
voilà,
much.
merci beaucoup, Emmanuela. Bernard.
Bernard Généreux, 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Keza, for being here, and I'd like to thank you for being here. I have a number of questions I would have liked to ask you, but I have a motion that I'd like us to put forward now. Is that the committee invite the Deputy Minister for Tourism, Official Language in la Francophonie, and the Deputy Minister for Training, Colleges and Universities of Ontario to appear before the committee for 1 hour to discuss the future of the Université de l'Ontario Français. I'd like a discussion on this, and I'd like us to unanimously vote in favor of this motion to invite this witness before we table our final report, so that we have an opportunity to speak to these people. Mr. Keza, I was a mayor of La Pocatière, and the MRC at the time was setting up eco recycling centers, and the MRC told us that we didn't have the means to do so, but La Pocatière did. So we told the MRC, we'll fund it, and when you have money, you'll pay us back. In the context of federal-provincial relations, could that happen? Could the federal government take direct action and say, okay, Mr. Ford, here are $84 million. We'll fund this amount entirely, and then you'll pay us back. The only decision he would have to make would be to say, well, okay, when we get the money, we'll pay you back. Well, what is doable and maybe more obvious? Let's say it's $10 million per year. The federal government commits to pay half of this over the first 4 years, and over these first 4 years, the federal government would not have to spend anything. Does the province really need to ask the federal government to do this, or can the federal government take this measure directly with the university? I can tell you that's not a question that's been raised so far, but my impression is this. And of course, I haven't done a legal analysis of this, but on the basis of constitutional principles and my general knowledge as to the law that applies, if a request is made and we say, okay, this is an essential institution for us, the government refuses to accept these amounts, that decision would be a violation of constitutional obligations on the part of the province, and I can't see how the province could justify it. Even summarily, even theoretically, how could the province refuse this funding advance? Right now it's saying it doesn't have the money. Well, what will happen in the next 4 years? That's a decision that could be postponed to later. Thank you very much, Mr. Keza. Mr. Généreux, I find your motion receivable, and we'll start by thanking Mr. Keza for his presentation and for his contribution to the community. I think I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues to say, you know, congratulations, bravo, and thank you for what you're doing for the Francophonie. We will suspend for just a few moments, and we will continue our discussion in private afterwards. Mr. Chairman, can I ask one final question? I'd like to clarify something, if you'll allow me. Mr. Keza, I have a very direct question for you. Can the federal government directly deal with the university without going through the province at this point? I think the answer to that is no. I can only do a follow-up on this. If there is a refusal on the part of the provincial government to accept an offer of financing from the federal government, funding from the federal government, if there is this type of refusal, if the government does not want to uphold that very constitutional obligation it has, then perhaps we'll have to go before the courts to force it to. Thank you very much. We'll be suspending for a few moments. Thank you, Mr. Keza.
Nous reprenons. Nous sommes pas télévisés dans cette deuxième partie.
So the second part of the meeting is public but not televised. I would suggest that given that the motion was tabled in public, we can study it in public, and then for committee business, we can then go in camera. Does that suit everyone? Yes? Okay. On the motion, so I'll read the motion before us, that the committee invite the Deputy Minister for Tourism, Official Languages and the Francophonie and the Deputy Minister for Training, Colleges and Universities of Ontario to appear before the committee in order to discuss the future of the Université de l'Ontario Français. That is the motion. Debate. Mr. Sanson. I don't really have a problem with it. This is a battle with Ontario. I don't have a problem with this. What information are we going to seek out? You know, the Minister for Tourism, Francophonie, and the like. You heard Mr. Keza say what he had to say about this commitment from the federal government to provide 50%. This is a public meeting, yes, but Mr. Keza's answer is having an effect. It will have an effect on any offer from the federal government to the province, and due to a potential refusal of the province on this one, lawyers could call for an injunction. It's a pressure tactic. Yeah, they need pressure. Perhaps they have information we don't have, and they deal with this on a daily basis. Truthfully, we're here, you know, once or twice a week. These people have been focusing on this issue in depth for the last 3 weeks, and they might have some very relevant information for us. On the basis of what Mr. Keza just told us, of course, we don't want to end up before the courts for 5 years, but the purpose is this. The point is this. And you're saying, and your minister is saying, that she's prepared to act and to fund the first 4 years, and she said it publicly, if she's prepared to do so. Where's the offer? Where's the offer from the deputy minister? Well, wait a second. What we just heard is that if the federal presents this offer to fund the program of the first 4 years, it's to force them to make a decision as to this offer. If they refuse to accept it, then it would require an injunction. It's unconstitutional, and then the province will be forced to say, okay, we have no choice but to accept. I think Mr. Keza's comment was really relevant. What we're hearing from him, or heard from him, is that notwithstanding the actual university and its funding, what this issue is really goes to the very heart of the reality for official language minority communities throughout Canada. And I think it goes way beyond the multiple $1 million, $44 million that Ontario is asking for this university. The Ontario government's decision goes way beyond this particular university project. And I really think that our decision, our report, and our recommendations have to state that the Ontario government has no choice but to fund this project. And if we don't do this, if we don't ask those individuals to appear before us, to tell us where they're at in their own process and what they think, because, you know, this is a constitutional expert, very experienced lawyer who's here, who's told us what he thinks. Listen, if we're not prepared to act on that, then I don't know what we're doing here. Thank you, Bernard. Mona. Thank you very much. I'm fully comfortable with this. I just think there are two people missing in this amendment, in this motion, I should say. I'm not sure how we want to deal with this, but I think we really should meet with the Deputy Minister for French Language Services, Madame Fougère, who has a very tangible role to play with respect to this Université de l'Ontario Français. And we should meet with Diane Adam, the president of the university, who is in discussions with the provincial government. She'd be in a better position to inform us of these comments regarding any kind of financial agreement, I fully agree with the two deputy ministers that have been put forward, but I think we're missing a couple of other people. Should we amend this motion? Is that all right with everyone? Does the amendment suit everyone? I have a follow-up question. We think we'll be done tomorrow night, but could we still be sitting Thursday night? I think we'd have to invite them when we resume after the holidays. I should remind you, as soon as we come back from holidays. Well, Mr. Chairman, that's in February. And I have to remind you that the important date is January 18th. Everyone would be, out as of that date if we don't do something. Or we try to hold this meeting tomorrow. Is there some way to do this? Is there some way to fit this within our calendar now? We have to have a report. The report can be done remotely. We could have a teleconference call. I think it's urgent to act. Christmas to me, I mean, come on. It's the 11th now. There's still, we still have 8 more days ahead of us. Let's just take a step back. We were talking about the amendment, says the chair. Does everyone agree to the amendment? Yes? Yes, so the main motion has been amended. I would like to support Mr. Généreux's motion as to us hearing witnesses on Thursday. Perhaps that's not possible, but I think, as Bernard just said, it's worthwhile trying. We're talking about a crisis here. This is unheard of, and it's an extreme situation. In these types of situations, you need to take exceptional measures. Let's try to have a meeting on Thursday if that's possible. I understand that might not be realistic on such short notice, but if we don't try, we'll never get an answer. And then I agree with Mr. Généreux as to the need for us to host an exceptional teleconference call in order for us to advance these issues because, we have to face the fact that time is running out. January is right around the corner, and I support Bernard Généreux's motion to do this proposal to do this as soon as possible to carry this issue forward and address it. This is an issue that affects us all. We've seen solidarity rising throughout this country, in Quebec and elsewhere. Let's show solidarity and let's do the work that is required. I gather that Thursday, the 13th, is the amendment to the motion. Thursday the 13th, if possible, if possible, because if it's not possible, then of course it's not possible. A question on the amendment? I don't have a problem. We could do this tonight. We could do it tomorrow. My problem is, what is our purpose here? We hear from them? What do we do then? I would prefer the report won't be submitted until the end of January. The interpreter would point out that people are speaking at the same time. There will be a special telephone call. They'll send us the report, and then we'll ask our questions, and they can send us a report by email. Most of the report is going to cover what the witnesses have told us. The recommendations or the conclusions are the important part. This is not a 45-page report. Inaudible to the interpreter. If we don't do this before Christmas, frankly, it's not going to look good. If someone can't be there on Thursday, then just get a replacement for you. We can't table a report realistically overnight. It's just obvious we won't be able to table a report before our adjournment. This is happening this week, the adjournment. The interpreter will point out everyone is speaking at the same time. I think we could host an exceptional meeting in January. Why not? We can come here for a day or 2 days if need be. It's always open to us before the 15th, but we need a strategy. I feel that if we just jump now, we might not actually reach our end. Thursday the 13th, if possible. Do I hear agreement here? Not an agreement? No, I'm not available on Thursday. December 13th? Mr. Chairman, it's not an issue of personal availability if some people cannot be here around the table. You know, we should be here. The calendar is set out until the 15th. You know, it's always a little earlier that we always break a little earlier, but the truth being told, we should all be here until Friday in theory. So I have no problem with having the meeting on Thursday. If individuals cannot physically be there, then let's just replace them. No problem. I'd like to get back to the amended motion, to the amendment, so that we would host a meeting on Thursday morning. Comments inaudible? The chair. What I see before me is an amendment where we say December 13th, if possible. Thursday morning, as usual, then we would host a meeting. Madam Clerk, I would call on you to check to see if there are available witnesses for Thursday morning, witnesses that could be here. Does that suit you? Yes, the amendment is passed. So Thursday morning for a meeting, if possible. Let's get back to the main motion, which is right there on the screen. Yes, before we go to that. René? Can we get this notice as to whether or not it is possible as soon as possible? Madam Clerk will certainly contact the people we've mentioned, and she'll let us know. Because I have, 10 hours of travel time ahead of me on Thursday, and I would leave very early, but I'm of course available. Madam Clerk has just told me, says the chair, that as soon as this meeting is over, she will be working on this. If there's only one witness available, should we meet? We still meet. Comments inaudible to the interpreter. They are not on a microphone. If it's important to hear from them, we should hear them all. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but it's impossible. How realistic would it be for 4 people to show up here? We've got 4 names in the motion. I think if we have 2 out of 4, we should proceed. I don't think we can hear from all 4 on the same day, but 2 out of 4 is good. We should proceed. René, Mr. Chairman, I don't need to hear from Madame Adam because we have heard from people from the university and the Deputy Minister of Francophone Affairs in Ontario. I agree, as Mr. Bernard Généreux said, we need to hear from her. Deputy Minister for Training, Colleges and Universities of Ontario is very important. Deputy Minister for Tourism, Official Languages and Francophonie. We should hear from these 2. We all agree that we need these 2? Ideally, yes. If it requires unanimous consent, I'm telling you now that if at least Ontario's not there, then I'm not here. So we agree that we need both deputy ministers from Ontario. We agree to that? Everyone's in agreement on that? Okay. I'll read the motion that the committee invite the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Official Languages de la Francophonie, and the Deputy Minister for Training, Colleges and Universities of Ontario, and Madame Diane Adam, Board of Governance at the Université, to give us an update as to the future of the Université de l'Ontario Français on December 13th, Thursday. Could we get them via teleconference call? They don't have to show up here in person. The only thing this person will be able to tell us is that it's over for Ontario. Forget it, it's done. That's what she's going to say, I think. We shouldn't presume anything, I would think. She doesn't have to come here in person, is all I want to mention, says Mr. Généreux, the chair. All right. I think we will proceed in camera before we vote on this. So we'll suspend a few moments and we'll go in camera.
On continue.
We'll resume. Go ahead, Stephen. You have the floor. Mr. Chairman, given that we're in camera, I'd like to know, I think we can see that there is some convergence in terms of the work of the committee and what we've heard from the witnesses, and it's urgent at this point. Perhaps we can proceed to instructions to the analysts because we expect a bit of an expedited report. I think the earlier we clarify our expectations, the earlier we get a good final report. To my mind, there are 4 aspects that have arisen from our study. First of all, I'll use the expression, which is, we want to criticize the government of Ontario on some level. We agree that there are some financial challenges for the province, but that should not end up a burden borne by Francophones in the province. There are a number of other aspects to this that were presented in the testimony. I would expect unanimous support for that first point. We should ask Ontario to reconsider its decision. It's it's unlikely, but I don't think we can put that aside. Mr. Kaza was abundantly clear. I heard a really positive tone from him. I'm glad we passed this motion. I also heard a sense of urgency and also a search for solutions. I think we're seeing some solutions out there, and on some level, as Aluba said, we have a moral responsibility to provide solutions. Of course, we cannot forget that the federal government has a leadership role to play in exceptional circumstances, and that has arisen quite clearly from the witness testimony, and perhaps Mr. Pelletier would be a good witness to hear if the committee wants to hear from them. Now, that's the second point. Now, yes, we want to criticize the Ontario government on its decision. We have to focus on our leadership and taking action. I understand Bernard's passion on this. It seems as though if we can do things quickly and well, that we can ensure the survival of this project, the Université de l'Ontario Français, and I think it would be a major achievement for our committee to achieve that end. We need to make sure that there is no break in their support, the support for this university. And I was discussing this with Mr. Choquette, actually, I'm sorry, a former environment minister from the PQ government. Please don't take it personally. Péquiste, no, I wasn't. Second Minister of the Environment of Quebec, Mr. Ouellette. So Madame Lambropoulos is here. We're hearing rumors in Quebec about closing school boards. There's a government in New Brunswick. There's some concerns here and there. Even though we're focusing on this urgent situation in Ontario, we realize that we are conveying a message here as to the importance of official languages, and I hope that will arise in the report. And fourth point, something we might not have referred to yet, and that might be the cherry on the sundae, is the role of promoting linguistic duality as a key tenet of our Canadian identity. There is an issue here in Ontario about this French university, but it goes way beyond this. What is our vision of the country? And as far as I'm concerned, there's an opportunity here to take up. And I ask the question, why am I saying it now? Because I think there's convergence. I think we know where we're going with this report, and I think timing is important here. Thank you.
Did anyone else want to speak to this? Mr. Choquette? I'd like to go back to our meeting on Thursday in 2 days. If the 2 deputy ministers, or 3 deputy ministers, if we had the same answer from them as we did from Ms. Mulrooney, saying that it doesn't concern us, the University of Ontario, well, what do? I can't remember the correct term in French. Do we send them a subpoena to ask them to appear before our committee because we believe this is a priority? So that's one question we have to ask ourselves. If they don't come this Thursday, we'll see them at the end of January or February, and then we'll have to compel them to appear before our committee. So I'm not sure if you agree to this approach when we come back. I think if they refuse our invitation on Thursday without any valid reason, just saying that's none of our business what's going on in Ontario, they may answer that. They may say that. They may say they're not interested in this topic. So what do we do then? Do we compel them? Christine would like to say a few words. Mr. Sanson, did you want to go before me? If I may, I don't think we should presume they're going to refuse the invitation. We shouldn't base our strategy on such a presumption. Thank you, Daryl. Christine wanted to say a few words. I just wanted to tell you that normally what we do, we escalate the issue. Once the meeting is over, I will seek out the contact information for the deputy ministers. I have their contact information. There won't be a problem. I'll send them an invitation right away. But if they refuse the invitation, we will have to meet again as a committee to decide what to do. We have to have a meeting because this is a committee motion to have them appear. It's not just the chair who can say what to do. We have to move a motion at committee. Thank you. Step one, you're going to invite them. They may refuse, or let's assume the two most important witnesses will refuse our invitation. Then we need a motion. Can we do it by teleconference? No, we have to be here physically in the room to move this motion? Yes. She nods. Inaudible. Thursday morning at 8:45 a.m. Then I'll be leaving. So we'll meet on 8:45 a.m. on Thursday to move this motion. I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. If the deputy minister is going to come here during this Christmas period, well, that'll be a real gift. It may move things. It may shake things up. We're not sure what'll happen. That's what we're here for. Mr. Sanson, no, never mind. Bernard, the committee can meet outside of when the House is sitting. It's a real tongue twister. So our committee can meet outside of House sitting hours. Yes, that is true. The chair has the prerogative to send an invitation or anytime. There are other mechanisms that can be used. I could talk to you about it one-to-one later. We could hold a committee meeting outside of the normal time slot for our committee. So my objective is not to play any political games or to excuse anyone, but we're facing an urgent situation. We've created this study to move urgently to solve an urgent situation. So what I'm saying is that if we cannot meet Thursday, Chair, because the witnesses are unable to attend, should we wait till January 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th? It's important to, well, I think we have to, as a committee, table a report before the House resumes on this issue. We cannot table a report if the House doesn't sit. That's impossible. Mission impossible. We cannot table a report if the House isn't sitting. We can do all the work up front. And when we come back to as soon as the House resumes, we can table the report. 2 questions. First, do the political parties, can we send them, can you send me your recommendations so I can insert them into the report? Can you send me your recommendations? We have a consensus, no? We have to be careful. We don't want to presume anything here. Are you going to send me your recommendations so I can put them in the report? In my opinion, I don't think this is a political thing. We are an independent committee. We represent ourselves here. Of course, we have to do our own work but we are here and we can make recommendations together. I think this has to be unanimous. So if you don't want to send them individually, no, we could send them. I could produce some and then you can give me your recommendations and then I could insert them in the report. Usually our recommendations overlap. Lucy will. This morning, Mr. Kaza gave an opinion on an important issue. I understand that federal funding for education has to respect provincial jurisdiction. So the ideal situation would be to have a memorandum of understanding. But the question was asked, can the federal government send the funding directly to the university? And he said no. But remember that when Mr. Power was here, he said he didn't see any constitutional obstacles for the government sending the money directly to the school boards. So I have 2 different views here on the educational issue. So do you think it'd be worth it to send a letter to Mr. Power to get his opinion on this? It's perhaps a thorny issue, I don't know. But do you think it's worth it to do this or not? Do you know what I'm saying? Please repeat, because this is not exactly clear. Mr. Kaza, well, can you do the analysis again? Ren, you wanted to speak first. So the coach is turning into a pumpkin. We're running out of time. So we should discuss it with the constitutional experts again, Mr. Kaza, Mr. Power. I think we have 2 scenarios. One, we can invite them again. We want answers. And if they don't want to come on Thursday morning, and even earlier at 8 a.m., we could move a motion here at 8 or 8:15 if necessary, whatever you want. I think we should do it early. So we could move a motion, because I don't think we should write recommendations based on what we think these people would say. I think that lacks credibility. Either we make recommendations based on what we've already heard, and that would make sense. But we don't want to make recommendations based on what we think we may hear. So time's running out. We can always add recommendations based on new testimony we hear. We could get started in the meantime.
Reality of the situation, or you have to go and ask the 2 witnesses specifically?
I guess I could ask the department what Heritage thinks.
I think that would probably be best,
You'd
and
prefer
then
that?
you don't have to quote their wrong sayings, but I guess make sure that what you're quoting
So
is
you would
right
prefer
and
that I stay
factual.
within the federal government for the time being?
Well, like you said, it's touchy to go back and say, "Oh, you were wrong," and you testified this. I don't know.
No, but
think-
I wouldn't assume that he was wrong, but I just asked them to compare. But
Okay.
do you prefer that I stay within the government?
Deux personnes qui ont demandé de nouveau, est-ce que vous voulez... On a entendu 2 choses contradictoires, comme
We've heard 2 contradicting opinions.
It's going to be difficult to add it to the report, regardless.
But it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's you're asking them to clarify, and it might change the meaning of what was actually said. right?
Now, what the point is not to quote them necessarily in the report, but if the committee at some point wants to go ahead, and that's why I'm asking, is it even worth it? If the committee wants to go ahead at some point and say, well, we'll have to bypass the province and go directly to the institution, to the university, can it be legally done? So,
Darrell, Alupa et François. Darrell.
Moi, 8 heures, c'est mieux.
8 a.m. would be better for me. I could be there rather than 8:45 if we need to move a motion. But I'm not convinced that these two opinions are contradictory. Explain why. I understand that Mr. Kaza was talking about the university and Mr. Power was talking about secondary schools. But what Mr. Power was saying is that nothing would prevent the federal government to go directly to the school boards. So if they can do so, well, when we're talking about universities or post-secondary schools, why wouldn't this be the case? This is under Article 23 of the Charter. Section 23, rather. That's what I'm asking. Is it worth doing this? Okay. Inaudible. Alupa? We'll never find a definitive answer to this because it's a constitutional interpretation. And rulings are rarely unanimous. So we should go ahead and ask Mr. Bastarache what he thinks as well, if he's free to say what he wants now in terms of the subpoena. If they reply and say they can't come Thursday, perhaps we could tell them. If they ask them if they could appear in the second week of January. And if they refuse again, then we could subpoena them. But depending on the answer they give you, we should look at that. Because we're in camera and the situation is urgent, we don't have a lot of time, well, when I send the invitation motion to these individuals, I always speak to them. And when I speak to them, well, as I've done in the past, sometimes I suggest to that person that if they don't accept our invitation, the committee may move to another stage. As a clerk, I can tell them that it's an option, but often I'm not proactive in that approach. I'd like to know what you think of this. Perhaps I'm opening Pandora's box here, but I want to know what I should do. That's fine. It's perfect what you're doing. If that's what you always do, then just do that. François. Chair, I agree entirely with what Christine has just said. Don't hesitate to suggest that there could be another option, that we're very serious in our approach, and in terms of Lucy's proposal, it's important to know what we want as a committee. Do we want to head in this direction? Do we want to make a recommendation saying that we should directly subsidize the university rather than going through the provincial government? If the answer is no, then we shouldn't move ahead with that question. I don't think that's the direction we're taking right now, so I don't know if it's worth it moving ahead with that question. Based on what Mr. Kaza has said today, we should be offering funding, and if they refuse this funding, then there are steps constitutionally that could be taken. Legal steps. That's what's interesting. And that's in that direction I think we should head. Another option was mentioned, but I think we should focus on that one. That's may not be a unanimous solution, but that's where the solution that most people would support. Once I call them, and if they tell me they're not available Thursday, but they are available, as Mr. Clark would say, the second week of January, should I come back to you with this information? Well, it shows that there's goodwill there, but I just want to make sure. I'll communicate this information to the chair, and then you'll make a decision at that point. Okay, thank you. Other comments? Would the meeting be at 8 a.m. if they do meet? What do you wish? 8:45 a.m.? 8:45? If it's 8:45, I'm unable to attend. 2 comments in terms of the clerk's approach. I think we should remain diplomatic in that case. And the government decides on the second point. So we have 2 options, as we heard this morning, but it's not up for us to decide. We can make a recommendation to the federal government, and we can say that one option would be to pay the money directly to the university, and another option would be giving it to the Ontario government, and then it could decide what to do. But it's not necessarily up to us to decide which option is the best. Of course, we can put everything on the table, and so that would be real value add. Thank you very much, Chair. So please block off Thursday morning in your timetable at 8:45 a.m. And so then we'll have an update, and we'll find out whether we'll hear from our witnesses at that time, or maybe there'll be other motions to move then. If we hold the meeting earlier, I suggest a breakfast with tourtière. Or a mimosa. Christine, the reason why the chair is asking you to set aside this time in your timetable, because I need something to put on the invitation for the meeting. I may not get an answer right away. It may take until tomorrow afternoon. So don't be surprised if you receive an invitation at the last minute, because I have to have something to put on the invitation. But if we can't meet on Thursday, we could meet on the first Tuesday after the House resumes. But there's a deadline for the university in January. Oh, we can meet when the House is not sitting, but we can't do so by telephone. But we can meet when we want, unless there's prorogation. I won't be here during the holiday season. I won't be here. But 1 week in January, second week of January. Sometimes I can't go home as often as I wish, so don't count on me for January. I'm just telling you up front. In conclusion, I'd just like to wish you all a wonderful holiday. We'll see what happens for Thursday, but I just want to wish you all a wonderful holiday, all committee members, and also everyone around the table, our interpreters who support us over there, our sound technicians, all the assistants, everyone involved. I wish you all a wonderful holiday, and it's always such a pleasure to work with everyone, even if we don't always agree. We're happy all to work with you, so you've done a great job. So I'd like to wish you all the best for Christmas, and the meeting is adjourned.